Hello, Helen Eager.
Hi there, Richard. Thanks for coming.
Oh, look, it's very nice to be there in your studio space, or at least virtually in your studio space with your works behind you. Your exhibition is Duets at Utopia Art Sydney. And just before we start to talk about the works in the exhibition, a reminder to the viewer, as usual, that the idea with this conversation is for the viewer to go to the gallery website to find the exhibition, to find the works, to find those images, and to look at those at the same time as listening to our conversation, perhaps in a separate window or even on a separate device. That's the way to get the best value out of the chat that you and I, Helen, will now have. And as I said, the exhibition is called Duets. As we can see behind you with those two works, they certainly seem to be pairs of geometric images. There's wonderfully active names of some of the works: Fandango, Repartee, Cavort, Serenade. When we walk into that gallery, either virtually online or if we did in real life, what would we see?
Well, the couple of pictures behind me are very similar to the ones that are in the gallery. I could have put them in, but there wasn't enough room. So you will find a couple of forms dancing on a white ground, I guess. The white ground's sort of like a stage, and the forms sort of relate to each other, and so I named them those things because they're like dances, and usually with pairs. It's like a fandango is a pretty sexy dance.
Yes, indeed. I noticed that you used the word dancing very, very quickly in your description. That it seems to suggest a really active relationship in your mind, anyway, and hopefully in the viewer's mind, between these quite formal geometric forms. What sort of relationships are you hoping that the viewer might see?
Because they're quite abstract, but they have a dynamism to them, and so I think that not only dance, but it could be like a conversation, or I don't know. So you need there's a tension between them, and maybe it's a good tension or a not tension, so they can expand and maybe be running away from each other or getting together. So it's sort of, it's up to maybe the viewers to work out what is actually going on, which is part of abstract work. For me, I find, as I say, it's a dance and a conversation, and so I find them quite uplifting.
Mm. You use that word imagination, what people might imagine the relationship to be. I wonder, in the process of creation, though, do you have a sense of, as those forms develop, what their relationship is? Or is it simply a matter of potential once the eventual image is created?
I'm aware of the tensions that are going on while I'm painting them. It's a very slow process of painting, and then I build up the colours slowly. But yes, for instance, the one called Repartee, it seems to me like it's this really a conversation between two people, and they're almost similar, and they're going backwards and forwards with that little conversation. I'm not sure how other people see that, but yeah.
You mentioned the process being a very gradual one, and I know that your process is not only very gradual but very exacting for you as the person creating those works. Can you give us a sense of that process and the many layers, not only in the colours but even on the, as you described it, on the stage set, the theatre set of the white ground?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a long process, and it usually starts with me in my studio drawing or doing watercolors, just doing lots and lots of drawing in books, and then on bits of paper, and the paper gets bigger, and so I play around with the shapes, because even though they're all similar, they're all different, and so they have different angles to them, and they have different pieces between, different shapes between them. So, and then once I've got that sort of in my head, and some ideas and some colours, and how they'll work, then I get onto my canvases, and I get a whole lot all at once, and I paint them with gesso, just a white gesso, maybe 3 times. And while I'm doing that, I'm still thinking of my drawing and what I can do with it. And then I place the forms similarly to my drawings on the canvas, and then I start painting.
The drawings, as you describe them in that way, sound very much like a preparatory step towards the paintings, but drawings for you, certainly in the past, have also been very much self-sufficient works, that the act of drawing has sometimes been a final step as opposed to just a preparatory step. Is that still very much a part of your practice, and do you see drawing as a standalone creative process?
Yes, I do. I still find it that even though they are your preparatory works, I find that they're of their own. They're intimate things. They're different to the paintings, but they still have their own standing. And I suppose I did a lot of drawing because I was a printmaker, a lithographer, which is a beautiful drawing technique. And so, yes, I've worked on paper pretty well all my life, I guess. And so some of these images end up being like a piece of paper. Now it's the stage, but it's the forms on a piece of paper, which is like my drawings.
I want to go back a little in time so that we can get a sense of perspective on where this exhibition now is the result of, in terms of a very long journey over a number of decades. Because going back a very long time, and I guess we're talking over 30 years, your works were focused for a period of time on still life, essentially, on objects, on spaces. And then there was a very significant process of change. Can you describe to us how that process of change started happening and why?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, as you say, I did interiors in the 70s, and my concern was always a colour, and my interiors were very colourful. And then I started focusing on objects like teapots and domestic objects, and looking at the colour of the light and the colour going off it. So and my paintings got bigger and bigger as I got more confident and more expressive and like that. And then I went to New York in 1988. I had a grant to go to New York. And so that was a pretty amazing experience to see the boldness of abstraction, but also the boldness of what artists are able to do, respected and able to do, and the openness of the place and the unlimited availability of materials and the excitement and stuff. So I would say that was the changing point of honing into my objects and then just abstracting them. Like, for example, a window, the light coming through a window hitting an object, it ended up getting more rectangular and more geometric, and it just sort of flowed from there. I haven't really looked at it since then.
It's interesting because if the viewer, for example, went exploring and found your website, in addition to the Utopia Art Sydney website. They could have a look at some of your past exhibition works. And I was thinking around about that time, about 1990, there was an exhibition called From an Old House in America. And some of the things you described then that you were starting to find during that time in America seem to be coming into evidence there. There are senses of parts of interiors in those works, but at the same time, there's a kind of rectangular, formal structure to them where you just see a bit of light and just see a bit of shadow. Was that the beginning, literally, of that transformation into the geometric representation of light?
I think it was, yeah. And it was, you could still have the hints of the interiors, but they were fading and they were becoming more geometric. I still kept the shapes, like a piece of furniture in front of a window with a little bit of wall on it ends up being like four rectangles. And so I played around with just that and make the rectangles bigger and smaller, and colours and the light. And then from then, it's a long evolution, but then I ended up just saying, well, why don't I just take it away and just make it three rectangles, and then two, and then that rectangle, one day when I was drawing, it just sort of fell over and became just one big angle, and then from that it just became two. I called them mountains, but they became two like triangles. And so yeah, it's a long process. But I think that the work that I'm doing now is when I started doing groups of triangles,
yes,
on a ground, and then the white ground became a prominent and important part of the work.
And actually, the way you described that, there's the work which you did on the wall, the very large work that you did on the wall at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney some years ago now, called Tango, I think it was, which was, if I remember rightly, that was all triangles, and all orange triangles on a white surface. So is that the sort of work that you're meaning in terms of those geometric forms evolving into the triangular forms on the ground?
Exactly, that's exactly right. And before I did the paintings, I did actually do a drawing show where my thoughts had begun, and so they were those on pieces of paper, and then they just expanded onto the canvas.
It seems a very, very disciplined and a very distilled version of seeing, and as you've described, going from those experiences in America, then moving to the rectangles and the triangles and the very limited disciplined shapes on the stage that you choose to build. What does it give you to have such discipline and such restraint in the images? What are you hoping to get from that creation?
The discipline is just part of me, so I don't think of it as like anything difficult to deal with. And I think that the discipline, like I always have these little rules about how I do things. Like, say in the background there, you can see the four triangles, and they've got two colours, and then a separate colour in the middle of the form. And so when I'm drawing, I make these little rules up, and then you don't have to think about that anymore. So you actually free yourself up to think about the colour and a whole lot of other things. So it's it's a way of freedom.
Do you see those constrictions, in a sense, those rules, as you're just describing them, as being in any way parallel to, for example, the structure in a particular form of poetry, you know, a certain number of syllables in the lines of haikus or sonnets or whatever the poetic form happens to be. Is it a similar kind of discipline process for you?
I guess it is, and the same with music and that, you know, the repetition or something. Yeah.
I guess a part of also what I'm asking or curious about is you're also asking the viewer to engage with these, you know, these very, very disciplined and perhaps at a passing glance, often similar seeming forms, even though they are subtly really different. How do you manage to pull the viewer into recognizing the subtlety of that interplay?
I hope that it does in a way that they're actually quite bright, and they capture you quite quickly, and you could say maybe, yeah, that's it. But I think that all art needs to be looked at really well, and I think that you have to give it time, just like a piece of music or just a poem. You need to invest a bit of energy in working out what is happening. So yeah, I just think that there are enough clues in there for, you know, someone to say, well, why has she got only 4 colours, and, you know, why does that work, or what's the you know, why is there tension there, and maybe they have to think about that.
So you're hoping on the one hand that it can be a meditative process in that there will be time spent looking and thinking, but also perhaps an intellectually stimulating process in that people will need to find those clues and to find the triggers for that kind of thinking.
Yeah, and the work is part of me and my life, and viewers have their own lives. So, you know, they're characters. The works are characters, so they will be, you know, will speak to everyone in a different way. So, you know, they're open. They're very open. I hope there's an open dialogue.
You said that perhaps they can speak to people in different ways, but you did say earlier that you felt that they had a very positive kind of energy, and all those titles, as we've said, you know, the repartee, the cavort, the serenade, the fandango, tango, you know, that earlier work that we were talking about, they all sound essentially like fun or very, very active, positive activities. Is that what you might be hoping to leave with people?
I do. I think I'm a very positive person, and I think that we need positivity. A few people have said that these are socially distanced, like we are at the moment, but they happened well before this happened. But I can see that some people would think that.
So they're certainly perhaps resonating with the zeitgeist to a certain extent. But having evolved, as we've heard you talk about, that process from the physical representation of still life objects and interiors to these present duets of geometric form, as you say, that's been evolving, perhaps distilling over a long period of time. Do you have in your mind a sense of what that next evolutionary step for you might be?
No, I don't. I'm still in this one, there's a point where you never know what's going to happen. So you continue on and on and on, and then somewhere along that little line, something happens, and then you go, oh right, I'll try that. For instance, these works came out of my works called Satellites, and they were a form. Not unlike that, they had a core shape in them as well. So they were one big form like rolling through space. And so after that show, I kept drawing. I always, you know, I'm always, if I'm not painting, I'm drawing. And so I was drawing away, and then I just sort of left out, I decided I'd leave out the middle and see what had happened. And then followed on from that and played around with colours and my little rules, and this is what came up. So I don't know what will happen next.
Well, we look forward to whatever does happen next, but for now, Helen Eager, thank you very much for sharing this exhibition with us.
Thank you. Thanks for doing these things.